He stuck his finger in the end of your what?
Howdy, everyone. Pull up a chair, kick up your boots, and take a sip on a nice cold
Sarsaparilla.
What?
Well, I would write it down, but I don't figure you could read it. Sody pop.
It's Support Your Local Podcast, the show where we go over the 1969 Western comedy classic, Support Your Local Sheriff, one chapter at a time. I'm Robert Smith, your host, coming to you from beautiful Tombstone. Yes, that one. We join our movie today in Chapter 8, Meet the Danbys. I wonder what's going to happen there. We already know one Danby. But before we jump in, I want to just take a moment to kind of give you a lay of the land, both in regards to the time frame that the movie is happening, as well as when the movie came out, in a segment I like to call It Came in '69.
That gun had gone off, it had blown right up in the face.
Now, it wouldn't have done my finger a hell of a lot of good either, would it?
In 1869, the University of Oxford wins the first international boat race held on the River Thames against Harvard University. French missionary and naturalist Armand David receives the skin of a giant panda from a hunter, and this is the first time the species becomes known to a Westerner. He also first describes the specimen of the pocket handkerchief tree, which will be named in his honor as Davidia involucrata. New Zealand's first university, the University of Otago, is founded. Jump ahead into 1969. Richard Nixon becomes the first president to visit a communist nation, Romania, since the beginning of the Cold War. Cult leader Charles Manson and a group of his disciples murder 5 people, including Sharon Tate, in her Los Angeles home. A Protestant fraternal group known as the Apprentice Boys lead a parade in Northern Ireland, causing riots. Attacks on the Loyalist Catholics lead to riots in Belfast as well, and this is the beginning of a bloody period known as the Troubles. British troops are deployed in Northern Ireland following the 3-day Battle of the Bogside. In New York, the Woodstock Music and Art Fair opens with over 400,000 young people in attendance. Performers of Woodstock feature Crosby, Stills and Nash, Joe Baines, The Grateful Dead, Creedence Clearwater, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Jefferson Airplane, and Canned Heat. In similar news, 2 people die at the Woodstock Music and Art Fair in New York. One concert goer died from a heroin overdose, and the other died from a burst appendix. Not to make light of it, but if you have 400,000 people and there's only 2, that's not bad odds. A 3-day recording session takes place for Miles Davis and 3 other performers. The album Bitches Brew is created. Andrew Cunanan is born, and this is the would-be serial killer becomes notorious for murdering Gianni Versace. This was later made into a series, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story. The day before his 46th birthday, the legendary boxer Rocky Marciano dies in an airplane crash over Iowa. This has been It Came in '69.
Wow!
And we're back. We begin our chapter today with 3 men riding their horses into town. We pan alongside them as they ride up and dismount. The 2 gentlemen to the sides are pretty familiar to those that watched Westerns from this time frame, and we'll get into them in a little bit. But the one in the middle is the most noticeable, and this is Walter Brennan, a legendary actor and famous for so many different Westerns throughout his career. They dismount, and one of the men talks to Walter Brennan about sticking to the plan, which he repeats that it's not going to take more than 1 day to take care of this situation. So danger must be looming for our beloved sheriff. Apparently, this is Paul and the 2 brothers of Joe. They've come into town to rescue him from our dastardly sheriff. We'll see how that pans out. Paul leaves the other 2 sons at the saloon and crosses the street towards the sheriff's. He doesn't tip his cap to the lady passing in front of him across the street, and this is apparently a way of accentuating the fact that he is in fact the bad guy, in case there is any confusion. He walks into the jail immediately, walks to the desk where the sheriff is sitting, pulls his gun, and demands to get Joe back. And this leads to one of the classic actions of this movie. When I say top 5, this is probably number 1 in my book. I know I have about 10 or 20 top 5s, but this one's legit. The sheriff just simply pokes his finger into the end of the gun. And this is the point in the movie where we have gone full-blown Looney Tunes. I mean, this is literally something straight out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've seen the Bugs Bunny cartoon with Yosemite Sam where this actually happened. So if Paul was to pull the trigger, I assume that the gun would have exploded and would have peeled back into a flower shape, and they both would have been covered in black dirt. But much like Prudy already being muddy before she got knocked down in the mud, I told you keep an eye on that. When you're looking at this, make sure you look at James Garner's finger before he puts it into the barrel of a gun. As millions of times that I've seen this movie, I never noticed it until this rewatch, getting ready for this episode. You can actually see that it's already black from previous takes. Paul is perplexed as to what the sheriff's doing with his finger in his gun and demands that he remove it. But the sheriff just sternly tells Paul, "How dare you come into my office and pull a gun on me?" I think that's a fair judgment. They banter the same question back and forth until the sheriff finally convinces Paul to take his finger off the trigger and slowly uncock the gun. He removes his finger from the gun, takes it from him, the gun that is, and unloads the bullets, a la what he did with Joe previously. Now that the gun is out of play, they can have a more civilized conversation, and Paul asks if he can see Joe back at the jail, and the sheriff obliges and tells him he's back in the back. The sheriff just casually takes out a knife and starts cleaning the fingernail in his right hand, apparently to get the gun oil off of it. And I always looked at this as a symbol for the conversation being de-escalated and brought down to a casual level. So, he's just chit-chatting with Paul Danby at this point. But it wasn't until this viewing when I noticed the black on his finger. That's when I realized that he's actually cleaning the gun oil from under his fingernail. It's just a nice little touch, something that, again, you just kind of notice with repeat viewings. Paul goes back to see Joe, and he noticed that there's no bars in the cell. There's no bars in the window, but Joe is just casually sitting on his bunk to where he says, "Hi, Paul." It's a nice little switch to Paul's point of view with the camera. I don't know that we've done that yet in this movie. I don't think we've gone to a first-person perspective, so it is a little bit jarring, but it is a nice touch to kind of establish Joe's kind of silliness and the silliness of the jail not having any bars. This obviously perplexes Paul as to what exactly is going on. As we get the point of view of Paul looking around the jail, we see again that there is nothing around that would have warranted the red paint. So I stand by my original statement of I'm not sure what that red paint was doing there outside of it being available for the joke of the blood spill. We also see with Joe sitting there that there is an iron hook attached to the wall right by his head. And if Joe is so intent on escaping, and keep in mind, he's attempted this so many times just in what we've seen on screen, I'm wondering why he was never handcuffed or chained or shackled to that ring sitting there right next to him. I'm pretty sure that's what that ring is for. But Joe's just kind of left freestanding as he was. So curious. Maybe it's a towel rack. I don't know. It's what it looks like, but to me, it would be a perfect place to shackle the prisoner, especially one that's trying to escape so often. We find out from the conversation between Joe and Paul that Joe didn't even know who the person was that he killed. It was just some random stranger. He also argues the point that it was still self-defense and that Paul had told him that there was no jail built that could hold a Danby. And this is when Paul screams back, well, apparently they built one, which is interesting since the jail that doesn't even contain iron bars at all is the one that can contain a Danby. So apparently these guys have spent a little bit of time behind bars. They've experienced jail, but it just hasn't been able to hold him. So Paul is obviously still frazzled with everything that's going on, and he tells Joe that he's going to have to stay in jail for a little while until they can figure out what's going on and what they can do to get him out. And during this conversation, Joe mentions the fact that when Jason saw him shoot the stranger, that he wasn't even the sheriff. And he's right. Perhaps it is a loophole that they could use in his case. It's actually pretty sound thinking, but Paul shuts that down pretty quickly, preferring to come up with his own plan of breaking Joe out. When in doubt, do the illegal route. It's a saying I have. I think it's on my family crest. I'm not sure. There's certain areas of this movie where you see Joe is just maybe a little bit slow to the draw. No pun intended. But this is actually a pretty good idea of what would happen in today's society. This case would probably be thrown out because of some of the situations that arose from it. But again, Paul just kind of shoots it down pretty dismissively. Paul walks back out of the sheriff's office and makes a crude remark about the jail being pretty lousy. And I find this interesting that Danby wasn't aware of the jail. Given the pride the mayor and the town council had in the event of building it, it was kind of like a barn raising, they said. It was sounding like a big community event, and with as deeply entrenched in the community and the control they have over it, I found it interesting that the Danbys wouldn't be aware of more of this situation. But again, maybe they are kind of an absentee landlord where as long as the money's coming in, they don't really make it into town very often, and they're not really concerned with the inner doings of the town as long as it doesn't involve them or costing them any of the money. At this point, Jake walks in the door, and that's when Paul finds out that Jake's the brand new deputy. There's a nice little touch when Walter Brennan makes the comment that just last week Jake was shoveling he was working the stables. It's a nice little touch that they're avoiding the use of the S word. This is not an R-rated film, and it is more of a family comedy type. So they're obviously avoiding the foul language, but it's just an interesting script read and a way to get around it. It gets revisited throughout the movie, and it gets me a chuckle every time. Throughout the scene, you'll notice the clock on the wall now reads 9:15, and we're presumably in the PM as it's now dark out, but just keep an eye on the clock. It comes into play throughout the movie. Just kind of keep an eye on our continuity. Jake wants to know what happened with Paul Danby after he leaves, and the sheriff explains that he came in to see Joe, and then he left, and that was pretty much it, leaving the whole gunplay side of the story out of it. We cut to the saloon where one of the brothers Danby gives the tagline to our intro music saying, "He stuck his finger in the end of your what?" Which has to be one of the funnier jokes, and in this story, top 5, definitely in the top 5 jokes of this movie. The one brother Danby makes mention of the fact that Jason is the fastest gun around, and whoop, 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 we have our first trope alert of the episode. The hero is always the fastest gun around. I don't know. I'm sure that there are some comedy spoof westerns where the hero is actually slow to the draw. But for the most part, he has to be the fastest gun, period. That's just a stereotype. When Paul asks what he means, the brother mentions that it's all around town, people talking about how fast Jason is. And I found this interesting because they rode into town just presumably a few minutes ago. They got off their horse and they went into the saloon while Paul went to the jail, and we're meeting them presumably just minutes later back in the saloon, say 10, 15 at the most. I could see if they were hearing the stories about it in the saloon, but to hear about it all around town is a bit of a far stretch since they haven't really been outside the saloon since they arose. As we get a little bit more coverage of the brothers Danby, let's take a moment to take a look at the folks playing them in a segment I like to call Remember the Name.
That's about all I'm going to do the rest of my life is go around remembering your name.
And welcome to Remember the Name, the section of the show where we take a little bit of a deeper dive into one, or in this case two, of our character actors in our movie. So today we're going to look at the two brothers Danby, who are riding along with Paul One, the red-headed one, and the other one with the very deep booming voice with the brown beard. Played respectively by Gene Evans and Dick Peabody. First and foremost, let's look at Dick Peabody, born April 6, 1925. He left us in December 27th of 1999, almost caught the new millennium. He was an American actor best known for his role as PFC Little John in the 1960s series Combat. When looking at his IMDb, he wasn't in a whole lot. I mean, that was predominantly the only acting that he was at, so I'm not sure why he had such a little bit of a career. He was a World War II Navy veteran, and he was in various episodes of like westerns, so Bonanza, Gunsmoke, Daniel Boone, things like that. But in comparison to all the other actors that we've done for this movie, just wasn't in a whole lot. So I don't know if he was trying to be an actor or if he just kind of fell into it with his look. Obviously, he was a very large man. His IMDb shows him as being 6'6". And then had that deep booming voice, which granted, when I was a kid, even to this day, I honestly thought that he was being dubbed. I don't know if it's a sync issue or what, but it just seems like every time he talks, that voice doesn't match up with the facial expressions that he has, or it doesn't seem like it's coming from there. So I don't know if a lot of his lines were ADR'd, or if he just had that type of a voice, but definitely didn't sound exactly accurate or exactly lined up. But Mr. Dick Peabody playing one of the brothers Danby. His fellow brother, Gene Evans, born July 11th, 1922. He left us April Fool's Day, 1998. He is the ginger-bearded one, the red-headed one. He served in the United States Army during World War II. He did achieve the rank of sergeant, and he started his career performing with a theatrical troupe of GIs throughout the Europe campaign. He made his film debut in the 1947 film Under Colorado Skies as Henchman Red, and he appeared in dozens of films and television programs. He specialized in playing tough guys such as soldiers and lawmen. When you look at him and you look at him in this movie, you can definitely see that a bit. He was in Gunsmoke, My Friend Flicka, Bonanza, Wagon Train, Rawhide, Daniel Boone, also some non-Western roles like Dragnet, Charlie's Angels, The Incredible Hulk, MASH, Ironside, Lassie, and Murder, She Wrote. Was in over 60 movies, mostly Westerns. That's kind of what he's known for. I know I've seen him in quite a few of them growing up. You'll see him return in Support Your Local Gunfighter and a little bit more of a tough guy role. But he was in other war movies as well, and where I know him predominantly from is of the Sackett's TV movie. He was one of the Bigelow brothers. So those that don't know, the Sackett's is a TV movie that they made based on a series of books by Louis L'Amour, following the family, the Sackett family, throughout their landing in America during the colonial times, all the way through the Old West. Very great series. If you're into Westerns, you probably already know about Louis L'Amour, but if you don't know about Louis L'Amour, please pick up one of his books. He's kind of the Tolkien of world building in the Western genre. So he will spend four pages explaining the color of a mountain to you, but he definitely sets the scene. And now that I live out here in the West, I can see a lot of the stuff that I read in Louis L'Amour. And on a personal note, those that know me know my dad. That was my dad's favorite author. He owned every single Louis L'Amour book, both paperback, leather-bound, hardback, and would read them 30, 40 times over. Louis L'Amour was like his thing. So when they made a TV movie for the Sackett's, he definitely went out and got the VHS copy of it, and it's something that I watched a little bit on loop. It was actually, a lot of people always talk about the movies that they watched where there was The first time that they had a VHS that was two VHSs, whether it be like The Godfather or Titanic. The Sackets was actually my first experience to that, where the movie would stop in the middle and you'd have to pop the VHS out and put the second one in to watch the second half of the movie. But a really great movie. I've watched it a ton of times, starring Sam Elliott, Tom Selleck, a whole cast and crew of people. Spoiler alert, there's another person from this movie that will be popping up in there as well. But if you ever get a chance to check that out, definitely do. It's a pretty good flick. But alas, I digress. Mr. Gene Evans, Mr. Dick Peabody, the two brothers Danby, just a quick little snapshot of their history in film and TV in this segment that I like to call Remember the Name.
You tell him I remember his name.
And we're back. As we see in the background, the saloon is a lot more subdued now. Presumably there hasn't been another killing today, or the sheriff would have made sure that it was shut down. So just the fact that they're open is promising, means that they're on the upward swing of propriety. Through the conversation with the Danbys, we've come to find out that they were the ones that actually ran off the previous sheriff, roughly about an hour and a half after he took office. He was a very well-organized gentleman, as we've heard, but yellow to the core. We have the redheaded brother, again played by Gene Evans, who continues to stick his foot in his mouth seemingly every time that he speaks. It's the third or fourth time he has said something, and he's been immediately chastised by Paul. And this time he makes the mistake of asking Paul if he's actually scared of the sheriff. He immediately realizes his mistake and starts backtracking his words, but they've already been spoken. When questioned with this, Walter Brennan makes a very valid point, and one that doesn't exactly ring true with the traditions of a Western, so whoop, 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 anti-trope alert. He has self-realization, which is something that's pretty lacking in most kind of one-dimensional characters, especially in something like an older Western. He realizes that he is currently in a very powerful position and that he has a lot of money coming in through the control he has over the town, and he doesn't want to risk all of that by going toe-to-toe with the sheriff. Often in these macho, bravado, Western drama movies, that's quite frankly the opposite. So it's always somebody trying to prove that they're the best, or two, that they prove that they're better than the good guy, and they get involved immediately, much to their detriment, and usually, spoiler, to their death. But instead, Paul actually realizes that there's plenty of gunslingers out there, and perhaps they could start utilizing some of them to try and take care of this pesky sheriff situation. Paul tells the boys that he's going out of town for the day, presumably to find some gunslingers. While he's gone, he doesn't want the boys to do anything stupid and create a martyr out of the sheriff. When the redheaded brother, Gene Evans, asked him what a martyr is, Paul had forgotten that he hadn't passed the third grade. And we end our scene with the two brothers getting up to leave the saloon as well and walking out to presumably find out what else is going around the town. That is the end of our chapter, Meet the Danbys. We will return next week with Chapter 9, Dumb Little Old Girl. Their words, not mine. Don't at me. Until we meet again, please, if you haven't already, go visit us on our social medias. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, all at Support Your Local Podcast. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, reviews, anything like that, please feel free to shoot us an email. We can be best contacted at suppyourlocalpodcast@gmail.com. That's SUPP, yourlocalpodcast@gmail.com. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher. We're available where most of your podcasts can be found. If you're not seeing me there, please definitely hit me up so I can get that fixed, get that to you as best we can. Until then, we will meet back next week, but I do want to take a moment to do a quick Robert Recommends. So obviously, as I said in the previous episode, if you haven't been to moviesbyminutes.com, definitely give that a look. That is where you can find where almost all of the genre of Movies by Minutes can be found. So go there, check out all the 200 plus shows that are currently in works and in development and releasing content. Most of, if not all of your favorite movies are probably being done. But that's a good place to check one out. Me personally, right now, I'm on a very big Bat Minute kick. I like to let theirs build up a little bit and then do a big just binge listen to all those. Jonathan Parker and Niall McGowan do a wonderful job. They are one of the better of the group. And they're currently going through the Batman movies. So they started with Batman 89. They're currently in Batman Forever. Batman and Robin. So give them a listen. Definitely some great humor, some great guests in there, some great impersonations. So you get to hear a lot of Arnie currently, who's playing Mr. Freeze. But give them a listen. Give them a shout out. Tell them that Robert sent you. But until we meet again, folks, I appreciate you as always. I thank you for your time. And always remember, support your local podcast.
He stuck his finger in the end of your what?